welcome back to the shed. In today's episode, we're going to continue the build series on this ground cabinet you see here behind me. In today's episode, which is part 3 in the series, we're going to be ploughing the groove for housing the back of the cabinet and also the front sliding doors. I will then also go ahead and use Mortise and Tenon Joinery to add the uprights that support the middle of the cabinet. So now that all the blind dovetails have been cut, we're going to move on to putting a groove in the back to receive the back panel that'll go along the top, bottom and into the sides. I'm going to recess it 7mm into the top and the bottom, just because it's such thick material. I find that I can go a little bit deeper, and in the side material I'm just going to go 5mm. So what I've done here is I've got the bottom of the cabinet here. I've faced it with the back, which is where the groove's going to go, towards me here. I've just clamped it to my bench. I've overhung it on my side, so I can use a plow plane, or in this case it's a 45, a Stanley 45, and so we can actually just run along the inside here and clear everything and plow a groove. All you have to do is, once you've set your fence, once you use that same fence setting on every board to ensure that it's in the exact spot, the same on every board where you want it. Now, the way we use 45 or a little plow plane here, the Stanley 45 works pretty much exactly the same as it. So if you've got one of them, you can use one of them too. Now, the way we used 45 when you're just using it for ploughing, or the plow plane, is you start at the front edge and slowly work your way back. That way you don't have the blade ramming under the fibers, you don't have these really long fibers that you can get stuck up against the depth stop and everything. So what I've done with this is I measured the depth stop to the bottom of the skate, or the bottom of the main body here, 7mm. I also have the back depth stop, so I've set that the same. And so now it's just a process of ploughing. So, as I was saying before, you line it up right towards the end, hold your hand against the fence so it's sitting as square as you can get it, because you want it to come in nice and straight. And so to get to depth, you have to slowly work your way back. So the further you go back, the more you'll get to depth in front of it. And so the front parts will be at depth before the back parts. So you just keep working your way through. So what I'm going to do here, where this just chipped out where it shouldn't have, is just come back in and I'll super glue that back in. Just take a little bit of super glue. Now you might not have this problem happen. This pine has a tendency to chip out and tear out a bit, so I'm just going to run that back down in here and just hold it in place. And since this is at the back of the cabinet, I'm not too worried about it. So, as you can see just here, there's our groove. That was the shoulder of the back dovetail, and there was the last pin. So this groove has come in the middle of the dovetail, and because we'll be fitting the dovetail into this, it'll cover over that gap. So now I'll switch over to the side. I'll change the depth to 5mm. Okay, so what I've got here is I've adjusted the depth down the 5mm, and now as we line up here, we can actually plow right through, and and I don't know if you can see here, but that's going to put the groove right through in the middle of the tail. Because we're only going through 5mm, this is 19mm thick, we should have no issues in weakening the timber, so we can just go ahead, run the plow right through, and when the entire thing's put together, we won't even notice that the groove's there. So you can see just here how the groove's gone in. There's our 1/2mm, and it runs straight into the tail. So when we put that together with the tops and the bottoms, it'll be completely hidden and we won't see it from the outside because this is all that's visible. Now that the groove is run for the back panel to run right in, I'm now going to run 2 plow grooves in the front because I'm going to have sliding doors that cross over and cross in front of each other, made out of plywood as well. So I'm using the same blade as I use for the back. I'm using the same thickness plywood. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run 1 groove right the way through, no different to what I've just done here for the back. And then I'm going to move the fence out a little bit, shift the blade across another 3-4mm, and I'm going to run the second groove. And that's how I'm going to have 2 doors running in their own tracks. So I finished ploughing the groove for the doors. I ploughed a 5mm deep hole in the bottom and centimetre in the top so I can lift the door up and drop it into place so the doors can come out while the unit's together or can get put in at a later date. Now, while I was doing that, I know I said I was going to be doing it where I had 2 grooves next to each other with a 3 or 4mm gap. Well, this timber didn't allow me to do that, so now I've just got 1 14mm wide groove here. Yes, I used the smaller grooving bit because I didn't have one large enough, so I just did 1 cut, moved the fence, did another cut, and then I came down the middle with a 3rd cut to get the depth. Now, some of this chipped out. I did put the little cross-grain nicker down, and that actually helped me with some of the terribly twisty grain on these pieces. But now those grooves are done, so I come across, mark 88mm here. I'm then going to take my square off my reference face, which is this face here. And I'm just running a little mark, not right the way across. So that is the center of the top and bottom boards. Then I'm going to use these. I'm going to create a mortise and tenon in the top here. So I've got some central supports in here. So they're going to sit in here like this on the inside, which will help to support the center of the unit, and it'll also give us something to fix our sawtooth fixings that will hold our shelves that go inside it. So instead of 1 big long shelf which wouldn't be able to take much weight, when I do it I'm going to do a couple of shorter shelves that don't run the entire length of the unit. Now, I already had these pieces spare and lying around, so that's why I'm using these. Otherwise, the same material that I used for the sides could have been done, and you could have done a couple of mortise and tenons on each panel to fit them. But here I'm just going to have to do a single one on each side, and these will just be stopped tenons. They won't run right the way through, they won't be wedged, they'll just be a nice tight fit and glued into place. The larger material at top and bottom is 45mm, so I'm planning a 30mm tenon. So what I'll do is take my ruler and mark a 30mm tenon on this piece here. Now you have to make sure that your pieces are all squared. It doesn't really matter, but for the measurements you need it to be square. So, I'll take a 30mm marking and I'll mark it on my piece. Now I'm going to square it right round. This will be the shoulder of the tenon, and from there I'm going to determine the overall length by, I've got my cabinet on the ground here, squared it out, and I'm going to take the exact measurement off the piece of furniture. Okay, so now that I've got this marked all the way around, that's going to be the thickness. And you can double check yourself. So now that I've put the knife line on both of these for the bottom shoulder, I'm now going to mark the mortises. Now, these pieces are 30mm wide, so I'm doing a rule of thirds. So it's going to be a 10mm tenon with two 10mm spacings on each side that are going to get removed. I've got my 10mm chisel here set up just between the points of my mortising gauge, and I've marked out center so the shoulder, the fence is in the correct spot. And now I'm going to mark on the three sides of these pieces with the mortising gauge, making sure to reference my reference face, sorry. You've just got to make sure that the fence sits flat on your reference face when you're doing this, otherwise your lines will go in the wrong spot. Now that they're marked, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut this tenon out, and then I will show you what I'm doing down here on the ground to reference it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use my dovetail saw here. I like the finer tooth on it, and since my tenons are very short, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is cut pretty much right on the line. I want to try and take my tenon straight off the saw. I'm going to get it as close as I can so I've got as little cleanup to do with the chisel afterwards. And on the waist side, I'm going to do a little cut back against the knife line and make what Paul Sellers calls a knife wall. We'll bring the saw in against this little groove as a little reference point. And I'll start the toe end first. Established the saw kerf, and that establishes it straight, and then it's just a matter of cutting down the line, and this straight line should help keep you straight. So for something like this, cut angle to angle, and going corner to corner like that tries to help keep it straight, because you're aligning on the line from both sides and you can follow the line on your side. Again, angle to angle, or corner to corner. And now that we're done there, you just proceed to cut through until your the cheeks of your tenons come off. And that broke away, which means there's a little bit just to clean up here. So these are 60, so I'm going to put a mark at 30. I'm going to do that mark on the tenon so it doesn't show. mark at 30 and I'll line it up as best I can. So I'll grab my pencil, and in this case just going to lightly run that line through here on both sides. Now I can sit this in here and I'll line it up on that line so I know it's dead center, making sure that it's all square. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to use my knife, I'm going to reference. So now that I'm back at the bench, we will take the little shoulder nick just here and follow that right the way around, remembering take the square off your reference face. So what we'll do now is mark our 30 millimeters up from it, and we will cut the top of this off. We now have to mark the mortises on the top and bottom pieces. Now, because we're right in the middle, we can't use a mortising gauge to mark it. So what I'm going to do is mark it manually off the piece. So I've determined which of these rails is my front rail and which is my back rail. This is my back rail. I'm going to put my reference face to the outside, and I'm going to line it up right on that line and run it along this groove. And then on the inside, on that line that was already drawn there, I'm going to make a little nick, and that determines the length of this mortise. Since I used this 10mm chisel, I'm going to lay the chisel down here. I'm going to put my ruler on that line, which is the center line. And since we've got it at that, that's fine. I was just double checking. And we can take the knife, we can make a mark either side of that line. And that will be how wide our tenon is. And you can take the piece that you are using, line it up with it and double check it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my brace to bore most of the waste out. I've got a marking here down to the 30mm, and then I'll chisel the rest of it out. So we line them up. I do the very back and the very front first, and just try to keep it inside the lines. Keep the waste cleared. Now you just got to remember when doing this that we do have the lead screw here. So if you are boring out and you don't want it to go right through the top, you have to allow for that extra on top of the waste that you're actually clearing, because it'll only cut to the wings. now that I've finished boring these holes out using the brace, I come in with the chisel that's the correct size. I also use a smaller chisel just for clearing some of the chips out, especially right on the edges, and I've got a larger chisel just for cleaning up the sidewalls after most of the material is removed. Now, it's really a systematic approach. Come through, clear the waste along the knife walls first, that's what I do, and then I'll work on the depth afterwards, and I will use my little ruler here as a depth guide, so once I get it down to 30mm I know that they should fit. So what I do here is I place the chisel on the knife wall and just hammer it through until it stops. And I'll do that right the way around. Appear that tenon is a little bit too large in this situation, so I'm actually going to carefully pare I'm a little bit off the line, which I did not realise. Now we fit it down in there. Made a nice fit. Could do to come down a little bit, but I think it was that my shoulders were a little bit out of square. It's fitting nice and flush here. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like what you saw in this video and would like to support me and allow me to continue making these great videos for you, please consider liking and subscribing and checking out my Facebook and Instagram pages. I also encourage you, if you have any questions related to the content in any of my videos, please leave it in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you.